So we should button up, I think,
Mm-hmm.
what happens now, and I'm sure you were part of this, in terms of people with a disability in this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
There has been, again, an enormous outcry in the United States, I know, to ensure that the rights of those with disabilities are respected during a pandemic, as at other times. What's the state of healthcare and state of play, so to speak, in terms of this crucial issue right now, Paul?
Well, in Australia, because the pandemic was a possibility more than a reality, for most of us, the bigger impact has been the lockdown. And on the health system in particular hasn't been. In Queensland and Sydney, there's been a lot of capacity not utilised. So we haven't had the tough choices made. We haven't had people locked out of emergencies. But what we have had in both jurisdictions is a massive lockout of people who have ongoing needs. So one of my friends in Brisbane, their child, he's 4. He has cerebral palsy, and because he hasn't be able to get his ongoing physio each week and use the pool, instead of being able to walk as he was, he's now back almost crawling. And so a lot of people have missed out on the ongoing therapy and have really struggled. And I know the government's trying to open those resources back up for ongoing needs, but over the last few months, people have missed out on high blood pressure medication, physio, chiropractor, a number of they're not emergency, but they can become emergency. So I think that I see that in Australia, and I wonder how it's going in other countries where it's a longer process. I mean, for me as a blind person, I mentioned the inability to see where the dots are and read the signs, nowhere to touch. Because I'm totally blind. I use a white cane. I touch walls with the hands. I sit where there's a cross because I can't see the cross. And if I want help from someone, are they crossing social distancing or not? And at the moment now in Australia, we kind of no one's really. I think a lot more people are more relaxed about this problem now. But in the United States, you shouldn't be relaxed about it. Look at Texas overnight, New York. It's scary. And so for these people who have been locked out of those ongoing treatment, now for a few months, they're looking down probably another few more months of being locked out of essentially what is enabling them to function as a person.
So really, I think what I'm hearing you say is that the pandemic has, among many other things, shone a light on the not equal treatment of people with disabilities and also made it harder. Is that an accurate summary there?
Yeah, I think, and it also depends on the type of person with a disability. Some people with disabilities will be impacted much harder than others. So my most recent book looks at ableism at work and looking at how different disabilities are treated differently. So if you're a blind person, the level of disadvantages at one level. If you're in a group home or an institution, crowded in with other people, with carers not wanting to come in because if they go in, then they can't go do their other jobs. Suddenly there's less resources, there's less people, but there could also be disease. And, it's just, those people, there's not as outings, you can't do outings. So you're stuck in an uncomfortable situation, becoming unhealthy with inability to get out and enjoy life because all the supports have disappeared. So for some people, it's really bad.
So let's talk about your book, if we can. And I also want you to speak about your project. You say, my project aims to combat ableism in everyday life so that in the future, different ability is not associated with being disabled. What do you mean by that?
Well, I hope, this is a long-term vision and I may never see it, but this is where I see the world one day going, is that we no longer think of them and us, but just us. And so if you look at universal design, people don't say, oh, look, there's a disabled ramp. It's just a ramp, and they have buildings built with it's a ramp and there's steps. Well, in the old days, you might have just had steps. In the same way, when Austin Hall was built, there was no female toilet. And one of the first female toilets, this little sign at Harvard University, this was the first female toilet. Now you don't think of, there's a toilet. You don't say there's the bathroom and there's a female bathroom. It's just bathrooms. So in the same way, now you have disabled toilets in buildings. And so as we normalize diversity across the community, then the opportunity for everyone to be included is enhanced. And technology to build, design has a large part to play, as of course does attitudes and people's willingness to accept difference.
Do you think that's improved recently? And what are the kinds of things that you were studying that you hope could further this?
Well, yeah, despite the pandemic, I would say, well, before I left for the pandemic in January 2020, I would have said, or February, I would have said, it's never been a better time to be disabled in the lifespan of humanity. Currently under the pandemic, that's sort of currently on pause, so I'll have to reassess how that plays out. But technology, for example, when I first lost my eyesight, I had to buy a specialized computer. What was it? It was 4,000 Australian, which in today's terms probably would have been about 7 or 8 grand Australian, or about 4,000 US now. So it was a lot. And now I can do, then you got laptops like the Macintosh. You could just, it comes with a screen reader built in. iPhone has voiceover inbuilt. The GPSs, I use the mainstream one. So all of these no longer a barrier. I can seamlessly move through a lot of technology now without having any barriers that disable me. So in that sense, I think we've made huge changes. In terms of acceptance, well, I mean, I'm an associate professor. No one questioned in my promotion interview that I was blind or I couldn't do the job. How would I do it? And I see other people rising through the ranks as well with disabilities. The question isn't asked, how can you do it with a disability? The assumption is you can. So I think for a lot of it, the world has changed in a very positive way. There's still a long way to go, but it's much better.
You were there at Harvard University at a very significant time there in the midst of a global pandemic. And then you came back to Australia where you were there. Now I assume we're speaking to you from the University of Queensland, where you're a professor. What did you bring back with you from that fraught Fulbright scholarship in the midst of a pandemic?
Well, I think the energy and the hope, which despite all the dramas, people were filled with energy and excitement. I think it was just that moment. That for me was, before the pandemic hit, I saw it a lot more obviously, but then during it, everybody was committed to getting through it and getting to the other side. And when we got here in Australia, we didn't have that same we didn't have the same problem. But that was one factor. I mean, purely, that's sort of the deeper stuff, but the strategic stuff for my career, there's MIT and Harvard have just started a digital accessibility plan across the university, and we've got, I chair the disability strategy for University of Queensland, and next week I'm meeting with I'm trying to get a national disability action plan through a university, so I can't really go into details, but that's progressing, and we've got meetings with key parties now. So that I hadn't even thought of that idea before I left. So since coming back at the end of March to now, I've had meetings with our senior people and senior people in enough organizations that it looks like it actually might come off.
How exciting. Well,
so that's pretty exciting.
It is really exciting. I know that some of your work has also, your project was called Universally Designed for Whom? Disability, yes. The Law and Practice of Expanding the Normal User. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the reason I got interested in this is in my first Cambridge University book, I looked at the Marrakesh Treaty, which is enabling people with print disabilities to access books globally. So it's a really huge development. Like it's transformational how we access books, which is great, but not for everyone. In it, they described a person with a print disability as someone who's blind, fair enough, and mobility. They talk about people, quadriplegics can't handle a book. But for some reason, they exclude intellectual and mental disability. So people with dyslexia haven't got a print disability, which I read it and I thought, I'm just stupid. I must have missed it. I read it again. I'm looking through it going, well, where is it? They must be here somewhere, because I'd already written it into the text on my first draft, and I'm just trying to find where I could reference it. So I just assumed, print for the blind and dyslexic recording for the blind and dyslexic was the first charity in the US. So not like not like this is a new concept. Anyway, so they had decided somewhere along the line that they had to exclude that group because it wasn't politically, for some political reason. So that just got me thinking, wow, they've missed out. I mean, it probably won't impact too badly, because when the United States enacted the Marrakesh Treaty Implementation Act and amended 101A of the Copyright Act there, they used the definition they have in their Chafee Amendment, which has dyslexia included. So practically all the Hathi Trust and Bookshare books will be available anyway. But it still made me think, an international treaty excludes this group. And so then I got looking at it and wrote a paper also about how people with, if you have a suffering a psychiatric injury at work, are treated less favourably. And so I've got this real interest in how different disability groups are treated differently, because if you think about it, everyone has different abilities. Some people are smart, some people aren't, some people wear glasses, some people don't, some people walk, some people push in wheelchairs, some people are tall, some short, some black, some white. Everyone's got differences. And it's just how society is constructed, which turns some of those differences from simple diversity into disabilities.
So as you look forward in terms of the work that you're hoping to do, the community, as you rightly point out, when we talk about disability or diversity, it's a broad, multifaceted community. I'm part of that community. We have a daughter with an intellectual disability and autism and a rare disease. So it's a broad, multifaceted community. How do you, with putting on your legal hat, work to bring things together that are going to affect and improve the lives of everyone who is in that community? What's that going to take?
Well, I mean, everyone has different roles. So there's people that will be suing, people that will be marching in the street doing sit-ins, like in the Berkeley independent living movement. And for me personally, one of the things I've been doing a lot of is strategic alignment between university goals and disability outcomes. So I was one of the people that got the University of Queensland to adopt the level of disability action plan. Like they always had one since '99. But the one they've got now has a lot more teeth. It's got buy-in, and it's got an action group, which I run. And we've had a lot of substantial gains, and now we're trying to take that national. And one of the ways we've done that isn't by having to sue, but by aligning disability or good ability outcomes with the strategic objectives of the university. So we've, through talking to people and working to get through this group, we've saved the university money. At the same time, they've made things more accessible. So it's some simple things like that. And also as an academic, I'm involved. I do consulting for government as well, like National Disability Insurance Scheme, the Quality and Control Commission, probably about to start doing some for the Disability Rights Commission, Disability Royal Commission, and work with the Human Rights Commission. So I do a lot of work with that sector as well. And as I said, write academic works.
As we prepare to wrap this up, I know that you're an author. What's your most recent book?
The most recent one is Ableism at Work, which talks about disability discrimination in the workplace and how ableism, ability diversity, is turned into disability through laws and practices. And the next one will be written with coming out of the Fulbright with Harvard Professor Michael Stein on looking at how the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities is translated into the Global South. And that book is reasonably well advanced. We've got basically all the chapters at draft now.
So that's an exciting time for you as well.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. And I'm looking forward to going back to Harvard when things settle down a bit.
Do you have a particular time when that's going to happen? Do you know yet when that might be?
That's sort of up to the people to get it. I think we have to get it. Well, at the moment, the borders are shut. So when the borders open up and it's safe to travel, I'll be on the next plane.
And finally, anything else that you want people to know about your work, about where we are with disability rights in Australia, in the United States, as we finish our conversation?
Well, I think the Fulbright experience to me was inspirational. And I think we need to realize that in difficult times, we need to look closely at where we're at and where we're going. And I think reflecting on personal achievement and what's gone before helps us look forward, because Fulbright talked about the power of education and how valuable it was, and more valuable than a battleship. And I think that to me says a lot, because the education now it's through all that money invested in education, we're getting COVID, we might get a cure, we're getting people developing processes to reduce its impact on people, and we've got technology. So I think we've seen the real benefit of having a strong education system, and I hope that governments around the world see the value in universities and education and invest heavily in it now, so people in the future can benefit from what I've benefited from.
I can imagine that that is the case, and it's exciting to chat to you. Good luck with your book. Look forward to seeing that and reading that when it comes out. And thank you so much, Paul Harpur, for joining us from the University of Queensland.